Hello, geeks, freaks, and all those unique. This is EmceeFrodis, and I've just seen the first season of Star Trek Lower Decks, and I'm in awe. There will be spoilers for all 10 episodes of Lower Decks' first season in this review, so if you haven't checked it out yet, please do so. It is available in the United States on CBS All Access, and in Canada on CTV Sci-Fi On Demand, Crave, et sur Z en français. Why did I just speak French? Everybody watching this is probably an English speaker. No, I just want to show off. As a brief synopsis of the show, these are the adventures of the USS Cerritos, a California-class starship in the engineering division. Did you know that starships had divisions? Neither did I. Well, I suppose we knew that there were medical ships, like the USS Pester in the Next Generation episode All Good Things, but I never thought about it further than that. But the Cerritos is more of a tender ship. You have the Enterprise come in and do these sweeping diplomatic things, like first contact or escorting diplomats. And then a ship like the Cerritos comes in and takes care of second contact. It's all of the paperwork and less glamorous missions. We also several times over the season see the Cerritos dealing with wreckage in space. As we follow a less glamorous ship in Starfleet, the characters we follow are also in less than glamorous positions. All 4 of them are ensigns in various departments. Beckett Mariner is a command ensign, with more experience than her fellow lower deckers, because she's been demoted due to her insubordination. She's highly competent, but insolent because of her distaste for Starfleet's rules, stemming from both of her parents being high-ranking Starfleet officers, with her mother actually being the captain of the Cerritos. Contrasting Mariner, we have Bradwood Boimler, an eager-to-please but incredibly nervous officer who tends to make mistakes because of that nervousness. The engineering ensign is Sam Rutherford, a sweet and good-natured cyborg who is such a dork for the ship. Medical ensign Tivana Tendi is the new arrival to the ship. She's an Orion and is basically the opposite of the cutthroat pirate, sexy dancing girl stereotype that's been that species' hat forever. She's adorable and just so eager to please, serving the naive newcomer who believes the best in everyone. I've already gone on about my love of this series in my ranking of Star Trek video, which you can see here. But I only spent about 2 minutes getting into it, so I wanted to take this opportunity to really dive into how I feel about the show after the first season. Lower Decks represents something that I think is necessary for a lot of these juggernaut franchises. It changes the genre. We can talk all we want about the differences between Next Generation and Deep Space Nine and Discovery. They're all kind of the same. There are cosmetic differences, but the core of them are the same. They are action-adventure science fiction series. Even the animated series fell into this genre, although that was geared towards kids rather than the more all-ages to grown-up demographic of the live-action series. With franchises like Star Trek and Star Wars, there's such an established universe that I don't think we need to remain beholden to its established genre. There's such a rich and complicated history and set of rules for how things occur within the universes that we can still recognize something as Star Trek, even if the genre is changed. We've seen a little bit of this in Star Wars, with The Mandalorian having a more Western feel to it, but this is really the first time Star Trek has delved into that. Star Trek has always done fun comedic episodes. Think Trouble with Tribbles, Piece of the Action, Our Man Bashir, Bride of Chaotica, or any of the Ferengi episodes on DS9. It's not a complete departure. It's just, instead of being the exception, comedy is the rule of Lower Decks. I've seen a lot of people comparing the humor of Lower Decks to Rick and Morty because the creator, Mike McMahon, was a writer on Rick and Morty. Honestly, I just don't see it. I think there's an earnestness to the characters in Lower Decks that is missing in Rick and Morty. And I say that as somebody who actually does enjoy Rick and Morty. But I would equate Lower Decks more with a Futurama. It's comedic sci-fi, and yes, the characters can be jerks sometimes, but it's not nearly as mean-spirited as Rick and Morty. These episodes are very episodic compared to what we've seen in modern Trek with Discovery or Picard. I would say it's probably closer to Deep Space Nine with its storytelling style, It's episodic, but it's got an overarching storyline. Unlike Deep Space Nine, these arcs are character-driven rather than plot-driven. We don't have a Dominion war threat. We're focusing on the four main characters. It's a story about Mariner being brilliant but insubordinate, and someone who tests her mother. It's a story about Boimler trying to advance in his career but getting in his own way. There's less of an arc with Tendi and Rutherford, but there's some subtle growth with these characters over the season. This show also seeds storylines in subtle ways. See this character? He turns up randomly in every episode until it's revealed that he's Ensign Fletcher and a friend of Boimler's. He gets an entire episode about him. In episode 2, Rutherford briefly joins the security staff known as the Bear Pack. In the season finale, Shax calls Rutherford Baby Bear. The Titan is mentioned in episode 6, and guess what we see in episode 10? Mike McMahon is a full-blown Trekkie, and it absolutely shows. This is both a plus and a minus, depending on who you ask. I like to err on the side of glass half full. His love of the franchise radiates off the screen and makes you love Star Trek more by reflection. Sometimes he is so enmeshed in the lore, the references can be a bit of an overload, but I don't mind the references to previous series. I think it makes a delicious treat for fans. I think the real problem isn't in making the reference, it's in the elegance of the references. The references should work as a part of the story. The joke shouldn't be that they're making a reference to something. A good reference, in Much Ado About Boimler, we get this weird-looking guy. That he's a weird-looking guy makes no difference to the plot, other than it makes him seem sinister. But those who know Star Trek the Animated Series recognize him as an Adosian, which is the same species as Aurex, who was a new cast member on that show. It doesn't change your enjoyment if you don't understand it. It's just there. Then you have jokes like referencing Beverly Crusher getting it on with a ghost in Sub Rosa. Now, I giggled at that reference because Sub Rosa's really funny. But that reference isn't so much of a joke, it's just referencing something that happened in Star Trek. It's Big Bang Theory humor, where just because something is a reference to something geeky, it's supposed to be funny. I think the show fits well into the format. Sometimes, well, a lot of the time, there's not a lot of plot for a Star Trek episode. So they pad it out with technobabble or Beverly and Deanna talking about boys while doing stretches. The half-hour format in this, as well as the 10-episode run, keeps things moving at a good clip. I won't go through all of the episodes of the season, but I will highlight a few of my favorites, as well as a few that I think could have been done better. I already talked about Crisis Point, which is my favorite episode of the season. You can see that over in my ranking of Star Trek video. I won't go too deeply into the details of that episode again, but I think it struck a really good balance in referencing things without drawing too much attention to them. They were just a fact of the episode. The episode was kind of built around them. For other episodes I thought were really good, I loved Veritas, the episode before Crisis Point. I think that the back half of the season was incredibly strong. Veritas has the main characters giving testimony against the bridge crew. Star Trek loves a good courtroom episode, all the way back in season 1 of the original series. As each of the main characters tell their story, we get small vignettes that end up fitting together in this kind of Pulp Fiction style, where they intersect, and it's only after we've seen all of them that what happens makes sense. This is also an episode where Tendi and Rutherford really get to stand out, which I really wish we got more of them. I also really loved Temporal Edict, which is the 3rd episode of the series. While I enjoyed the first 2 episodes, Temporal Edict was really where I started to get a feel for the show, and I realized how much I was going to like it. In this episode, Captain Freeman finds out about buffer time, or, to quote Scotty,
"You didn't tell him how long it would really take, did you?"
As Freeman is stressed about losing a peace talk, she cancels buffer time, and we can see how badly it affects the crew. Not only was this episode incredibly funny in how everyone falls to pieces under the pressure of performing at all times, but it gives us a really interesting look at Captain Freeman. Most of her characterization over season 1 was just as the captain, and in her maternal antagonistic role with Mariner. In this episode, we get to see how frustrated she is in a lot of the same ways Boimler is. She feels that she doesn't get the recognition that her hard work deserves, despite all of the heavy lifting she does for Starfleet. There's something I'd like to point out, and I think it's what makes the show truly brilliant. There's a joke at the end of this episode that says that Chief O'Brien is the most important man in the history of Starfleet. On the surface, this may seem like one of those Big Bang Theory reference jokes, that it's more just about referencing a character rather than being a real joke. But I think there's actually a subtle brilliance to it. Miles O'Brien was, for 12 years, the everyman of Star Trek. He started out as an unnamed helmsman on TNG, and even when he went over onto DS9 as a regular, he was a non-com whose job it was to keep the station from falling apart. He is the quintessential Lower Decks character. So of course on a series about Lower Decks characters, he would be considered the most important man in Starfleet. It feels like such a layered joke. It went past, here's a reference to something from the past. But as much as I liked season 1, there are some episodes that I think are less than successful. I think the second outing, Envoys, is good, and I do like it, but if you look closely at it, you can see how it's a second episode. That's not to say that I didn't like it. Lower Decks is the only Trek series that I can say I liked every single episode of the first season. However, I think they were still getting a handle on the voices of the characters and learning how they interacted with one another. But the learning curve for them is very short, since Temporal Edict came right after this one. In this episode, Boimler and Mariner are escorting a Klingon diplomat, who they lose track of and need to find. I felt Mariner came off as a bit more mean-spirited than she will in later episodes. The beat plot was also a bit messy. I thought it was funny that Rutherford kept going to other departments to try different jobs, and certainly they pay it off in the finale. But I felt that we also know so little about Rutherford at this point that seeing him go to different departments didn't really help me understand him better. I felt the A-plot in Terminal Provocations was also fairly weak. In this episode, the ship ends up under attack and unable to protect itself because of an error on the part of Ensign Fletcher. It's up to Boimler and Mariner to correct it. I felt that Fletcher's motives were very ill-defined, and maybe the writers needed another pass to figure out how they wanted to portray him. But the episode gives us the best holographic villain since Moriarty, so you won't get any complaints from me. Oh, Badgie. But even in the lower points, I still had fun with Lower Decks. Even the weaker episodes are entirely watchable for me. Everything leads up to the finale in no small parts. This episode shows that even though this is an animated comedy series, it's still sci-fi, and it's without a doubt a part of the Star Trek universe. The Cerritos comes to the aid of another California-class ship, only to find it destroyed and end up being attacked by, of all people, the Packleds. Yeah, that joke species from TNG is back, and they're scary. They've salvaged parts from all sorts of warmongering species. We get the next evolution in our characters, with Boimler making advancements in his career, Mariner coming to terms with her relationship with her mother, and Rutherford nearly sacrificing himself for his crew. But this show does something that I think you could only really do in a show like this, one that attacks Star Trek from a meta perspective. For years, fans have wondered what happens on all these planets that Kirk and Picard visit and never follow up on. Lower Decks wonders that in canon, and now it's going to be the mission of the Cerritos, and Mariner in particular. Throw in an appearance from the Titan with Captain Will Riker and Commander Deanna Troi, and the not-so-subtle implication that Mariner learned everything she is from Riker, and you have a more than satisfying end to the first season. In terms of characters, personally, I think my favorite is Tendi. I think she's the character we know the least about personally, but what we do know appeals to me. She's a ray of sunshine, and nothing gets her down. That dramatic moment of her finding out Rutherford has lost his memory was just turned into, oh my god, we can become best friends all over again. It's a beautiful subversion. She's just so eager for everyone to like her, and I find her so endearing. I also love that not only does she go against all of the Orion stereotypes, but she gets upset when people try to fit her into that box, as Mariner did during her holodeck program. But guiltily, I have to admit, she was looking fine when she was in that Orion pirate outfit. I mean, we had no idea that under that uniform, she was a complete smoke show. Yeah, not the first cartoon character I thought was hot, certainly not the last. I think Boimler is the character I connected with the least, which is surprising because he's basically Martin Kreef from Cabin Pressure if you put him on a starship. Come to think of it, Mariner's a lot like Douglas. And Tendi and Rutherford are if you took all of Arthur's excitability and took away his stupidity. And the Cerritos is a junker like Gertie. Somebody get John Finnemore on the phone. I think he can get himself some Star Trek money. Is anybody watching this getting my Cabin Pressure references? Anyways, so Boimler's not my favorite. Just so many of his interactions were kind of cringy. There's a very careful tightrope that needs to be walked with characters like him. Like, he's a loser, but he's also pretty smarmy. So you want him to succeed at things, but not too much. I'm just not sold on him yet. Rutherford is just a sweetie pie. He reminds me of all of the good aspects of Geordi, just without the creepy holodeck humping stuff I try to forget. Even if this series does completely canonize that the holodeck is for fucking. I mean, okay, it was canon before. They just outright say it now. He's just kind of adorable. He doesn't have a lot of development, but I like what we've seen so far. Mariner is the character I think we've gotten the most characterization on, and it's a characterization that I like. I get where they're having her come from, and while a lot of it is Freudian nightmare, I think she does have legitimate complaints with Starfleet. But I like that she's not trying to leave Starfleet, but rather just subvert it from within and change things for the better. This show has also established some great supporting characters. I rank Freeman in the category with Sisko of captains are people too. She's not idealized. I don't think it's a coincidence that both of the captains I mentioned are the ones that have families. I'm also required to love Ransom. I've been in love with Jerry O'Connell since 1995, and Ransom is a meathead, but he's just so ethical. So he calls the original series crew TOS in universe, as in those old scientists. I've actually got a headcanon as to why he has a nickname for them. So Riker likes to do Enterprise holodeck programs. I think Ransom likes to do TOS era ones. And he's in particular really interested in the Pike era ones because he's kind of in love with number one. But even the holodeck version of her won't give him the time of day. Dr. T'Ana is the perfect cat lady. Other versions of the Chitons have been kind of sexy, but we know what cats are like. They're crabby and standoffish, and I love her. Also, she's totally Bones and Emress's love child. Or maybe love grandchild. I don't know the aging on Chitons. Either way, there's McCoy DNA in there. It is known. Wow, I'm laying a lot of random headcanons on you guys in this episode. So, the final member of the main supporting cast is Shax. Oh, Shax. The finale upset me so much because he was actually my favorite of the supporting characters. He was just so over the top and ridiculous, yet completely perfect. I loved how he went into these berserker rages and loved violence, but also called Rutherford Baby Bear and is totally supportive of him following his dreams. I was so sorry to see him go, but he got the most epic death of any Star Trek main character. He went out on his own terms, and it was beautiful. Lower Decks is a show with endless potential. They're not bound by the limits of live action. I would love to see them take advantage of this. We've already got to see that with Riker and Troy. I'd love to see other TNG-era characters. I mean, according to a deleted scene, Wesley is on the Titan too. Could you imagine Wesley and Boimler together? I can, and it's both hilarious and frightening. One thing I'd also really like to have happen in a future season, it doesn't need to be made a big point, but I'd love Barbara, Boimler's ex-girlfriend, to come back, only to find out she's married to the lover parasite. Doesn't need to be made a big thing, but just put it in the background and have it be a quick mention. For me, the first season of Lower Decks was an absolute joy. I think it's the strongest first season of any Star Trek, and at the moment, the series is up there in my top 3 favorites. I think it's funny and joyful. It's a love letter to all things Star Trek. I think people who aren't hyper aware of all of the references can still enjoy the humor, but there's an extra bit for those of us who do know all of the intricate mentions. I'm really interested to see where we're going to go with Boimler on the Titan with the Rikers, Rutherford regaining his identity without being a cyborg, and Mariner working with her mother. And who knows what'll happen with the supporting characters. Okay, I want Ransom to meet a parallel reality version of himself. I'm sorry, Sliders forever. At least the first 2.5 seasons. Lower Decks has been renewed for another season. I look forward to seeing the next one, and hope it's just the beginning. I mean, imagine seeing some of the events we've only had referenced play out. Like the destruction of Mars. Or the destruction of Romulus. Oh, jeez. Maybe we better not have the show run that long. Thank you for watching this review of the first season of Lower Decks. I really like talking about this show. If you like what I do, please support the channel by subscribing, liking the video, and sharing it across social media. You can also subscribe to my Patreon or buy me a coffee. I've also got my shirts on TeePublic and Redbubble. This is my Bisexual Starfleet Pride, which is available in a dozen of different pride flags. I just wear the one that's my flag. So until the next time, may the Force be with you.